Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our weekly Torah studies class for the Torah portion of Bo. Tending to God's children, parenting isn't only about you. Now, it is a natural desire of most people, it's kind of innate, that the person is going to want to have children. However, from a Torah perspective, it's not just a natural desire, but it's actually a mitzvah to have children. How do you fulfill the mitzvah? One boy, one girl. Now, the more the merrier. But if a person has 2 boys, 3 boys, 6 boys, 9 boys, 10 boys, no girls, maybe they did not exactly fulfill the mitzvah. The mitzvah is to have 1 boy and 1 girl, then of course more afterwards, but that's the minimum requirement for the mitzvah. My oldest is a boy, Sender. My second is a girl, Rosie. And when Rosie was born, I remember one of my friends called me and says, congratulations, you have now fulfilled the mitzvah, the minimum requirement for having children. Now, having children really, truly is an incredible blessing, right? One of the greatest blessings that God could give anyone. But anyone who is a parent knows that there's ups, there's downs, there's challenges, there's obstacles. It's one of those blessings that certainly does not come easy. Because of those challenges, there's like almost an infinite number of books, lectures, seminars on parenting. It's like every week, almost every day, right? There's a new article, there's a new expert, there's a new professor who's teaching you how to parent, how to discipline, how to educate and raise your kids. No matter how many of these books come out, at the end of the day, our kids still seem to be one step ahead of the latest parenting expert. And what makes it even more fun is that children have all kinds of different stages. There's the issues that you have to deal with toddlers and infants. And then there's issues that you have to deal with when kids become infants. When kids become tweens. And then when they grow up and they become teenagers. A week or two ago, we had a wonderful Zoom with Rabbi Doron Kornbluth from Israel. That you may remember how he introduced himself. He said, I am a father of 5 teenagers. I have a good friend of mine who's a rabbi, and on Twitter, the description of himself is, right, I have 8 children and 3 teenagers. Right? Any person who lives with, raises, knows teenagers, right, understands the challenges that certainly comes along with it. And for many, raising children can appear to be overwhelming, right? Parenting can be overwhelming. How does one find the strength to raise normal kids? Torah has a lot to say on this subject. The focus is going to be, what is Torah's message that will give us strength, power, and energy to do it? How exactly you do it, we're not going to get that detailed. We'll talk a little bit about it. But the main thing is, how do we have the strength and the energy to raise those normal kids? Before we get into the specifics, we're going to read a text, a general text that should give us a little bit of insight into the absolute importance of the relationship that a parent should have with a child and how much God cherishes it. Text number 1a, this is from the book of Bereshis. God is talking to Abraham, and God is telling Abraham, the very first Jew, why he was chosen to be the father of the Jewish people. God says, I have known him because he instructs his children and his household after him, that they should keep the way of God to perform righteousness and justice. Therefore, God will bring upon Abraham the blessings he spoke concerning him. God is saying to Abraham, I'm choosing you not just because you are so wonderful and you are so refined and you're so spiritual and you're so holy, etc. He says, I'm choosing you because you are a parent, because you are a parent that teaches their children, that educates their children in the most optimal way. So therefore, I know with you, there's going to be a future. There's going to be a future the way it's meant to be. So we see again the importance of the relationship. It's not just to have a nice, good, healthy kid, but when Hashem sees the way that we raise our children, right, That's the pathway and the avenue for all of God's blessings to descend upon us, because he knows that there's going to be an absolute future. So it's an incredibly important. It's the ultimate vessel for divine blessings, but it's also very hard. So the first rule that everyone has to know when it comes to parenting kids, when it comes to relating to kids, is that every kid is different. The Torah tells us that God created the world. When he created the world, the first human being, Adam, was created alone. The message was, we have to view every single person as a unique person. Each person is like a whole world. We have to recognize that we can't treat everyone the same. There's not one recipe, there's not one book, there's not one instruction manual that applies for every single kid. The Malbim makes a beautiful commentary on the words of King Solomon in Mishli, in Proverbs. But before we get to the text, let's learn a little bit about who this rabbi, the author of the Malbim, was. His name was Rabbi Meir Leibish Weiser. The acronym that he goes by is the Malbim. He was born in 1809. He passed away in 1879. He was a rabbi, Hebrew grammarian, and Bible commentator. He was born in Ukraine. Rabbi Weiser served as rabbi in several prestigious communities across Europe. His fame reached as far as the Jewish community of New York, which offered him the position of first chief rabbi of the city, an offer he rejected. He is best known for his commentary to the entire Bible, which was unprecedented in its scope and thoroughness. He placed great emphasis on explaining the precise meaning of every word of the Bible. So this is the Malbim's commentary to the famous words of King Solomon. Train a child according to his way. Even when he grows old, he will not turn away from it. The Malbim. This means that education must be tailored to the student, because every person is naturally adaptive to something else. Intellectually, some are sharp while others are more straightforward, and each needs to be taught accordingly. Or in skill set, each has their own particular niche where they can catch on and easily excel. An educator can identify these by examining what the student is naturally attracted to and strives for. Once identified, the educator must tailor their instructions according to each student's intellectual makeup and skill set. If one follows this approach, then even when he grows old, he will not turn away from it. However, if one educates a child without taking their unique natural inclinations into account, the instructions will fail the test of time. Sometimes a parent has particular expectations for their child. They must be a doctor. They must be a lawyer. They must be a CPA. They must be a rabbi, right? Whatever it is, that can tremendously damage a kid. We have to recognize the unique skills of a child. This is the job, the responsibility, the duty, and obligation of a parent, to recognize how your child is incredibly talented and gifted, but maybe in a very different way than you, and maybe in a very different way than some of their siblings. Nurture that, bring that out. When you educate a child in that way, even as they go old, they're not going to turn away from it. That means they'll have absorbed it. You want your child to absorb the education that you want to give them. You want your child to identify with the teachings that you give them. Make them tailor-made. If you teach your one child the same way as the other, it can ultimately lead to a disaster. But in order to do this, you got to know your kids. You really have to know them. You have to strategize. You have to think about it. It takes time. It takes effort. It's an ongoing process, recognizing that kids are different. What kind of time? What kind of effort? So here we go to text number 3, a fascinating comment by the Rebbe Rashab, who was the 5th Rebbe of the Chabad movement, and we'll learn about his life briefly as well. So Rabbi Shalom Dov Ber Schneerson, known as the Rashab, he was born in 1860. He passed away in 1920. He was a Hasidic Rebbe, Rabbi Shalom Dovber became the fifth leader of the Chabad movement upon the passing of his father, Rabbi Shmuel Schneerson. He established the Lubavitch network of yeshivas called Tomchei Tmimim. He authored many volumes of Hasidic discourses and is renowned for his lucid and thorough explanations of Hasidic concepts. So this is what he says about putting time and effort into parenting. Just as putting on tefillin every day is a scriptural commandment incumbent upon every Jew, regardless of whether he is a great Torah scholar or a simple person, so too it is an absolute obligation for every Jew to dedicate time every day to thinking about his children's education. One must do everything in their power, and indeed more than what is in their power, to see to it that our children follow the path in which they are being guided. The Rebbe is essentially saying that if you believe that there is anything that's important in your life that you should set aside time to do, that you make a priority, the education of your children is all of that and much more. A person needs to set aside time every day, like a half hour every day, to think about the unique talents, skills of your children. How are they doing in school? What are they learning? Are they excelling? In which subjects do they excel more than others? What are their relationships with their friends? Which friends are positive influences? Which are negative? What are their habits? What are they reading? What are they watching? We have to ask ourselves these questions every day. It's not enough that my child goes to a fabulous school and I provide for my child wonderful after-school activities and a safe home with plenty of food. Now, we should be doing all of that as well. But do we ask ourselves every single day, what have I done for my child's education today? What strategy, what plan, how am I going to make sure that my child utilizes his talents or her talents and skills to the best of our ability? So we need to strategize, we need to plan, right? We need to take it very seriously, and God willing, we'll be successful. But as any parent knows, sometimes we can try every trick in the book, give our child every single education, and it still might fail. Because when it comes to educating and raising a child, there are no quick fixes, and we have to give it our all and be willing to change, to alter, to be flexible if something is not working. So with all of these challenges in mind, and we may mention some more, how do we have the energy, the strength, the positivity to do all of this, the time and the effort that's necessary, right? How do we bring joy to the challenges and the obstacles of parenting? So before we get into the Hasidic approach, we're going to look at some classic texts on Jewish parenting. Now, from the Jewish perspective, right, being a good parent is not just optional. It's not just a nice thing to do. It's not like a goal that we put for ourselves, a New Year's resolution. It's actually a legally binding obligation. It's much more than a responsibility and a duty. It is absolutely the law, so to speak, that we give our child our all. Let's go to text number 4. Again, this is from the Malbim. One must begin educating their children from a very young age, training them to be wholesome. This training should include intellectual pursuits, proper behavior, and desirable character traits. It needs to begin early because whatever the child will be accustomed to from a young age will develop into strong habits and leave a great impression upon him or her for the rest of their lives. If the training begins at a later age, however, the habits will not become deeply embedded, and with the passing years will eventually fade. Right? The Shalah makes a very similar point. Some background on the Shalah. His name is Rabbi Yeshayahu Halevi Horowitz. He was born in the year 1565, passed away in the year 1630, and odds are that anyone who has the last name Horowitz is in fact descended from the Shalah. One of the ways that you can tell is because the Shalah was a Levi. That the Shalah was from the tribe of Levi. And just about any Horowitz that you're going to find today is from the tribe of Levi. Right? Some very famous Jews who had the last name Horowitz and who were from the tribe of Levi, Mo, Shemp, and Curly. Right? The Three Stooges. The Three Stooges' real last name was Horowitz, and they are all from the tribe of Levi. You could see the gravestone of Curly, right? The most talented and the best of the Three Stooges, certainly my favorite, has right on it from the tribe of Levi. Odds are the Three Stooges are a direct descendant from the Shalah, Rabbi Yeshayahu Halevi Horowitz. Again, born in 1565, passed away in 1630. He was a Kabbalist and author. Rabbi Horowitz was born in Prague and served as rabbi in several prominent Jewish communities, including Frankfurt am Main and his native Prague. After the passing of his wife in 1620, he moved to Israel, to Tiberias. He completed his Shnei Luchos Habris, an encyclopedic compilation of Kabbalistic ideas. He's buried in Tiberia, right next to the Rambam, right next to Maimonides. What does the Shalah say? One must begin to train and educate their children. One must begin to train and educate their children to develop good and upstanding character traits from the moment they begin to talk. Don't wait. They're little. Don't bother them. Such little kids. Don't worry. Not a good idea. Don't think I can act any way that I feel like when I'm around my kids because they're so little, they don't notice, they don't pick it up, they're not paying attention. It's not true at all. Kids mimic and imitate their parents from the earliest age. Children learn what's acceptable behavior from their parents, and they notice it at the earliest age. So those are just a kid, I don't need that, it's okay. No, it's not okay. Right? If you teach your children properly, then everything is going to be okay. If you allow your children to instill bad negative habits and character traits, it's going to be very difficult to undo. So how do we approach teaching our children mitzvahs? The mitzvahs are not obligatory until a girl turns 12 or until a boy turns 13. Do we wait till the bar mitzvah and the bas mitzvah till we educate our children when it comes to doing mitzvahs? Of course not, right? At the earliest possible opportunity, we teach our children mitzvahs. This is what the Alter Rebbe, the founder of the Chabad movement, writes in his Code of Jewish Law. And let's learn a little bit of history. His name is Rabbi Shneir Zalman of Liadi, often goes by the title the Alter Rebbe. He was born in 1745. He passed away in 1812, running away from Napoleon. Right? Napoleon was particularly looking for him, and he passed away while on the run. Hasidic Rebbe, halachic authority, and founder of the Chabad movement, the Alter Rebbe was born in Lyozhne, Belarus, that's White Russia, and was among the principal students of the Maggid Mizrich. His numerous works include the Tanya, an early classic containing the fundamentals of Chabad Hasidism, and Shulchan Aruch Harav, an expanded and reworked code of Jewish law. He writes, a father is responsible to educate his sons and daughters to observe all the commandments. Consequently, if he finds his child violating a commandment, he must ensure that they stop and make sure they know that it is improper behavior. The above applies even to rabbinic edicts. Now, what ages are we talking about? So clearly the Alter Rebbe means age-appropriate behavior. The moment that a child actually has the skill and ability to know, to understand, to appreciate the distinctions and the differences, that is the time when a person should begin to actually educate the child to appreciate that. Not every mitzvah will apply for a 3-year-old. However, the Rebbe taught us that the moment a girl turns 3 years old, she's certainly capable of participating in lighting Shabbos candles. She can physically do it. She can mentally understand it, and it will become a valuable part of her education. So as soon as kids are able and it's age appropriate, that is the time to instruct the kids in the various mitzvahs. Besides the act of education, Jewish law says that a father has a few other obligations as it pertains to raising the children. Text number 7, this is from the Talmud, Tractate Kedushin 29a. A father is obligated to circumcise him, obviously, that's talking about a boy, to redeem him, we're going to talk about this mitzvah in just a moment, to teach him Torah, to marry him off, and to teach him a trade. And some say a father is also obligated to teach his son to swim. So we see that some of the basic obligations pertain to religious, spiritual activity, right? Teaching him Torah. Mitzvahs like circumcision and the mitzvah redemption of the firstborn, we're going to get into a moment, but also making sure that the child is going to have a successful life. Getting married, having a trade, the ability to earn a living, and even to swim, right? A skill that is so necessary and so helpful and ultimately can save a person's life. These are the obligations of a parent to a child. But let's focus on the second example for just a moment, because that directly relates to this week's Torah portion. In this week's Torah portion, we have the 10th plague. The 10th plague is the death of the firstborn. God spared the Jewish firstborn. As Egyptian firstborns were dying all around them, God spared the Jewish firstborn. As a result of that, the firstborn took upon a sanctified, holy status. The ideal was the firstborn was going to be the Kohanim. The firstborn were going to be the ones to actually serve in the temple in the Beis HaMikdash. That privilege was taken away from them after they sinned at the golden calf. However, the concept that the firstborn is sanctified, that the firstborn is holy, nevertheless still applies from this week's Torah portion, because the firstborns were saved from the 10th plague. So what do you do? The firstborn has to be redeemed. So first, let's go to the Parsha, text number 8a. God spoke to Moshe saying, "Sanctify every firstborn to me. Everyone that opens the womb, firstborn to their mother among the children of Israel, among man and among animals. They are all mine." The mitzvah of the sanctification of a firstborn applies to cows, it applies to sheep, it applies to goats as well. And there's even one non-kosher animal that it applies to, and that is the donkey. So firstborn boys from various kosher animals, the donkey, and of course, the human being have to be redeemed. What is the process with which you can redeem a firstborn? There's a mitzvah called pidyon haben. This is how the Rambam outlines it in text number 9. We'll go through a little brief biography of the Rambam as well. His name was Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon, known as Maimonides or the Rambam. He was born in 1135. He passed away in the year 1204. He was a halachist, a philosopher, author, and physician. Maimonides was born in Cordova, Spain. After the conquest of Cordova by the Almohads, he fled Spain and eventually settled in Cairo, Egypt. There he became the leader of the Jewish community and served and for his philosophical work, Guide to the Perplexed. His rulings on Jewish law are integral to the formation of halachic consensus. So one of the most prominent rabbis in Jewish history, but also a very influential medical doctor, and wrote many, many medical textbooks as well. So the Rambam writes, by a biblical positive command, each Israelite must redeem his son. The firstborn of an Israelite mother, as the verse states, every firstborn belongs to me, and it is written, you shall have the firstborn of man redeemed. This duty is applicable everywhere and at all times. For what price does he redeem him? For 5 shekels. As the verse states, the redemption price for the child of 1 month is the equivalent of 5 shekels. So in Hebrew, this ceremony is called pidyon haben. Who does it apply to? The firstborn son that is born to parents who neither are a Kohen or a Levi. If a person is from the tribe of Kohen or Levi, the mitzvah does not apply, right? I am a Levi, right? My father, of course, is a Levi. So therefore, I have participated in very, very few family pidyon haben because the mitzvah would not apply to someone from the tribe of Levi. So if you're from the tribe of Levi, so Levi or a Kohen, the mitzvah would not apply. So it's the firstborn child that was born naturally. So if the child was born from a C-section, the mitzvah also would not apply as well. It takes place after 30 days. You have to redeem the child from a Kohen because there was an exchange of the Kohen and the firstborns. 5 silver coins are used. 2 brachas are made, the bracha over the pidyon haben and the bracha of shehachiyanu. It's a great mitzvah, it's a celebration, it's a party. There is a huge meal, a lot of people attend. It really is a beautiful thing. Now, what happens if a person never did it? Never happened. Their father never performed the mitzvah for them when they were a baby at 30 days old. It is never too late to do the mitzvah. And as an adult, the person should have a pidyon haben for themselves as well. Okay. Back to the idea of parenting and what the Torah approaches, the mindset, the attitude that we have to have that ultimately will invigorate and empower our parenting despite the ups, the downs, and the challenges that some of our kids give us. Here's a way to look at it. Imagine you are giving birth, you have just given birth to your first child. You are on the bed in the hospital, and the nurse hands you your firstborn child. The baby is placed on your chest, and you feel the little heartbeat beating. You feel the breath from the child on your skin. You can imagine the love, the ecstasy, the joy that a parent feels at that time, a first-time parent. And the doctor comes over to you with a very serious tone of voice. And he says, you must sign these papers. You are obligated to be a good parent. You're obligated to educate your child, to keep them well, and to keep them safe. Please sign here on the bottom line. Besides the fact that it would be so impersonal, right, and contrary to the emotional experience that you're feeling right now, it's crazy. Why would a hospital, why would a doctor need to do that? But you could make the same argument. We said before that to be a parent and a good parent is not just a nice idea or a goal or a value within Judaism. It's an obligation, it's a responsibility, it's something legal, right? It's legally binding that we must be good parents. Why is that necessary? Why does the Torah not trust that every parent loves their child and would do everything and anything in their power to raise the most well-rounded, the most refined, the most educated and sensitive child around? Why does the Torah not trust in the love of a parent to do the right thing? Does a parent not have love for their child? And the answer is, of course they do. Can we trust the parent? Yes and no. You can trust the parent most of the time. Why do I say most of the time? Because there are times when challenges and obstacles can appear in our life, some that directly relate to the child, some may have nothing to do with the child. It could have to do with that you're dealing with a parent who's sick and needs a lot of attention. It could have to do with the demands of your boss, whether being hired or whether you lost your job. It could be directly related to the child because the child is more difficult than you anticipated. Yes, the love may be there, but there may be challenges and obstacles in your life that get in the way of the love that you have for your child, that can prevent you from expressing the love that is there to the child and doing what you have to do, because sometimes life gets in the way. And then there's the flip side, right? King Solomon writes that love blinds and distorts. Because of your love and affection for your child, that might actually cause you to be blind to the child's challenges, to be blind to the child's true nature. Right? You may convince yourself that you're seeing things that you aren't seeing, and you convince yourself not to see things that you should see. So the natural love that a parent has for a child can be covered up, concealed, and hidden. It also can get you into a lot of trouble. So therefore, what does Jewish law do? Right? Of course, parents love their children, but halacha comes in to fill in the gap between loving intentions and proper child rearing. Right? The laws, as outlined and detailed in the Torah, serve as that extra reminder and give us those clear guidelines when the challenges can try to get in our way, and when sometimes our own love can be the greatest obstacle at all. We have a tremendous responsibility and obligation to our children, and we cannot allow our feelings due to external circumstances get in the way of giving what our kids need. And we also have to be aware that the responsibility of a parent to a child does not end at bar or bas mitzvah. It doesn't end when the kid gets married. We have an obligation and a responsibility to our children every single day of their life, because we are their parents every single day of their life. That does not mean that you have to get involved in their life and make trouble, right? That's not what we're saying. But what it means is, right, our children are still our children. And when we can help, guide, inspire, and benefit, right, we are parents ultimately till the day that we die. How do we have the energy? How do we have the energy when they're little, when they're tweens, when they're teens, when they're dating, when they're in college, and even when they have their own children? How do we have the energy to be there for them? The Hasidic perspective is we have to reframe the way that we view our children. We have to completely redefine to the core the way that we view having children. From the Hasidic perspective, children are a privilege and an honor. Now you might think, Rabbi, what are you talking about? You don't need the Hasidic perspective to come along and say that children are a privilege and an honor. Everyone thinks that. Everyone knows that. Now, you might think that that's the case, but that's not, in fact, the reality. If you look out into the world, some of the complaints that you often will hear why people don't have children or that many children, children are expensive. Do you know how many people say how many children I can have? There are studies that say each child will cost you approximately $1.5 million in their life. There are all kinds of calculations that people make. They're going to affect my style. I won't be able to go out to eat. I won't be able to have the same type of entertainment. I won't be able to go to a show, to a movie. I have to deal with my kids. They take time, they take energy, they take money. These are calculations that people make every single day. So much so, I listened yesterday to an incredible podcast. The podcast was with some academics who just wrote a paper about the effects of car seats on the birth rate. And what they concluded is one of the best forms of contraception is car seats. Hundreds of thousands of children have never been born simply because of the existence of car seats. And they track it through when the laws were passed that children have to be seated in car seats, the reduction in the amount of children that were born. And they conclude car seats are a pain in the rear. They're a pain to schlep kids in the car seat, out of the car seat. If you want your kid to go for a ride with someone else, you have to take the car seat out. Car seats are very difficult to install. They say 70% of people, in fact, install their car seats wrong. Another challenge is if you have a typical sedan, a 5-passenger car, you cannot put 3 car seats in the back seat. It won't fit. You can only have 2 car seats. Therefore, if a family wants to have 3 kids, you're going to have a minivan. A minivan costs double the amount of a typical sedan. So there's a major financial cost to having a third child. And many people feel that minivans are not very cool and they don't want to drive a minivan. So these two scientists put out this paper and they described in quite detail the hundreds and thousands of children who are not being born simply because car seats are a pain in the rear, or they would have to upgrade to a minivan. Does everyone think this way? Certainly not, and hopefully not. But for many people, this is part of their attitude to how they view children. Maybe 70% honor and a privilege, but 30% very expensive and take up a lot of time. And because that's the case, when things get tough, when things get challenging, often parents may tilt to the 30% of where kids are a pain in the rear and expensive and are getting in my way. And that could be a huge obstacle in really giving your children the attention that they deserve, the education that they need, and can damage them for the rest of their life. And we know how prevalent therapy is today. So what does the Torah have to say that can demonstrate for us, and we could really internalize the real privilege and the real honor that it is to be able to be parents and to have children? The first step in reframing is really getting, understanding, and appreciating that the children that we have are not only our children. They are God's children as well. We go to text number 11a from the book of Shemos. God says, "And you shall say to Paro, so said God, my firstborn son is Israel." Another verse in the Torah, "You are children of the Lord, your God. You shall neither cut yourselves nor make any baldness between your eyes for the dead." There are numerous references throughout the Torah which describe the Jewish people as being God's children. This is a lot more than just a poetic language that sounds good in a biblical text. Look what Rashi writes. Rashi is the most important, arguably, Rashi is the single most important rabbi outside of Moshe in Jewish history. Why? Let's see who Rashi was. Rabbi Shlomo Yitzchaki, also known as Rashi. He was born in 1040. He passed away in the year 1105. Most noted biblical and Talmudic commentator, born in Troyes, France, Rashi studied in the famed yeshiva in Mainz and Worms in Germany. His commentary on the 5 books of Moses and the Talmud, which focus on the straightforward meaning of the text, appears in virtually every edition of the Talmud and the Bible. Right? We practically do not learn the Bible and do not learn Talmud without the commentary of Rashi. When we are studying Talmud or Chumash, it is implied that it's with the commentary of Rashi. And this is Rashi's comment to the Talmudic tractate of Kedushin, page 30b. The sages, this is the Talmudic statement. The sages taught there are 3 partners in a person's creation: the Holy One, blessed be He, the Father and the Mother. When a person honors their father and mother, the Holy One, blessed be He, says, "I ascribe credit to them as if I dwelt between them, and they honored me as well." Rashi says, there are 3 partners. Elsewhere, the Talmud explains, the man gives forth the white parts of the baby, the woman provides the red, and God provides the soul by breathing it into the baby. This soul is what enables the body to see, to hear, and to speak. So what Rashi does is he explains the comment of the Talmud, that a baby does not have 2 parents, a baby has 3 parents. There is a father, there is a mother, and there is God. The father and the mother contribute biological components. Right? The Talmud says the father contributes white, the mother contributes red. The point is the father and the mother contribute the physical substance of the child. What does God contribute? The soul. God gives the soul, and the soul is in fact the core and the essence, the personality, the character. That is who the child actually is. Why does this matter? Why is this so important that we recognize that God is one of the parents and that every single Jewish child is a child of God? For this very important reason. Now imagine this scenario. Imagine your best friend, your absolute very best friend in the world comes to you and says, I have one child, my only child, the pride and joy of my life, the apple of my eye, etc. What if something happens to me? What if me and my spouse, we die, we get into a car accident, God forbid, and my child is alone? I want you to take care of my child. I want you to raise my child. I love you, I value you, I respect you. And if there is one person in the whole world that I would want to raise my child, if God forbid anything would happen to us, it would be you. How would you raise that child? If God forbid something happened to those parents and you now had the responsibility to raise that child, how would you approach it? Out of the respect and love and appreciation for your child, are you going to think about the values that you want to give to the child, the behaviors that your child should exhibit, the friends that the child would exhibit? Do you not think you would exert a particular interest, perhaps even above and beyond what you would do for your own kids, because you recognize the responsibility that you have, right, to raise the child of your friend? You would be motivated. You would take it very, very seriously. You would be alert at every single moment because you would view it as your mission. This is your absolute mission in life, that you were given this child to raise, to educate, and protect, because this child has no one else. This child only has you. And this is your friend's child that was given to you. Hasidic philosophy says this is the meaning when the Torah says we are God's children. It is our mission, it is our privilege, it is our honor to take care of God's children. This is the mission of a lifetime where God has entrusted his most precious soul, his most prized possession, the apple of his eye, to us, to raise, to educate. We should feel incredibly empowered. Let's go to text number 13 here. This is from the Rebbe. He says, every Jewish child is God's child, right? We call God our Father in heaven. Again, this is not just poetic stuff. The biological father and mother are merely God's messengers who are given the merit to give birth, to raise, and educate this special child. Right? This is a completely, totally different way of looking at how we raise our children. Right? It's not just our own kid, right? God has given us this precious soul. It's a privilege, it's an honor to be able to raise God's children. And because we know it's God's child, it's not just our child that we can mess up, whatever, it's our kid. It's God's kid, right? It becomes the mission of our life. Another way, though, to look at that is, you're asking me to raise God's children? Is it not stressful enough to raise my own? Now you're telling me I'm responsible for God's children as well? Your own kid, maybe you can mess up, but God's kid, how could you mess up that? So the answer is that if God gave you these kids, that means God trusts you, that you can do it. God gives you the power, the strength, the energy, the talent, and the skills to do the job, not just in an average way, but in a beautiful way and a tremendous way. The fact that you gave birth to a child means that God fully trusts you to be able to take care of, to nurture, to develop his children in the most beautiful way. Now, in the class so far, we used a lot of male terminology, right? The father's obligation to a son, and so on and so forth. What about the role that women play? Of course, we know when it comes to raising children, there's nothing more important and valuable than a mother. Text number 14 from the Rebbe. or just knowing that God himself personally appointed you to care for his child means you are the right fit and you have all the tools needed to get the job done. Again, something so important that we remember. Moreover, women have a special advantage over men when it comes to education and even to discipline. The feminine qualities in women allow them to impart their guidance with intimate closeness, soft spokenness, love, and affection, much more than a man can offer. This is especially pertinent in recent times when it is precisely the loving and warm approach to education. Train a child according to his way that bears the most fruit. Right? I can't tell you the number of times that I was stressed out or aggravated, bothered, frustrated by one of my wonderful, delicious, angelic children and was about to lash out or respond in a more aggressive and angry way. And it is the calm and caring, loving voice of my wife, right, that was able to repair and to restore and to control the situation 10 times greater than I ever would. So we certainly need to learn from our wives and from women and to develop these feminine qualities when it comes to educating our children as well. So women play the most vital, critical role when it comes to educating children. In text number 15, right, we're going to conclude the class with a very powerful job description of what a parent is supposed to be all about, right? It is not what you would think. Text number 15 from the Rebbe. There are three partners in the forming of a person: the person's father, mother, and God. The division of responsibilities in this partnership is as follows. Again, we got a father, we got a mother, and we got God. Who gets to do what? Who changes diapers? Father and the mother. Okay. Who babysits? Right? The father and the mother. Right? What's God's job? Right? What does he have to do? Look at what it says here. The biological parents are responsible for the spiritual welfare of the child. Education, for example. Meaning to say, God entrusted them with an extremely precious deposit, a godly soul from on high, with the hope and expectation that the parents will complete their assignment and see to it that the child's soul be overtly expressed in everything he or she does. A job well done means that when looking at this child, one should be able to identify that this is a member of the nation that was told by God, and you shall be to me a kingdom of princes and a holy nation. But when it comes to the physical needs of the child, that he be properly fed, clothed, and be healthy, etc., that is God's share of the partnership. And when the parents observe their side of the partnership, by educating their child to be an upstanding Jew, then God observes his side of the partnership by providing the parents with all their needs, whether it be finances, health, etc. The Rebbe says something very, very profound here. Conventional wisdom is that a parent's responsibility and obligation is to make sure their kids are physically healthy and safe, provide an environment that is safe with nutritious food, and where they get a quality education. Now, certainly this is true, but that's not what it means to be a parent. To be a parent means you provide for the psychological, the intellectual, the emotional, and the spiritual nourishment of the child. That's what it means to be a parent. Yes, you have to have a home that's safe. Yes, you have to have nutritious food. Yes, the kid has to go to school. But that's not a parent. That could be a security guard. A parent means the focus of your parenting, and you cannot and will not be satisfied with anything else, is when you're taking care of the spiritual, emotional, psychological needs of the child. What is God's role and responsibility? When you do your part, he will do his part to ensure that you have a sufficient livelihood that will be able to secure all of the physical and material needs of your child. So God says, you do your part, I'll make sure the kid has a safe home. I'll make sure that the kid has nutritious food, and so on and so forth. But the primary responsibility of a parent is the spiritual, the psychological, the emotional development of the child. Values, ethics, Judaism, cultivating the unique talents that each child possesses. We have to remember that children are tremendously impressionable. They watch us. They see everything that we do, and it's our responsibility to make sure that we put them in an environment that is spiritually stimulating, intellectually stimulating, emotionally stimulating, and so on. Is it an awesome responsibility? It is the awesomest responsibility, and it's the greatest honor, and it's the greatest privilege. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the class, this applies to people who have children at home. This applies to people who have grandchildren. This applies to the way that we relate to any children that we are blessed to share and have a relationship and a role with in life. And absolutely, we have to apply all of these principles to ourselves as well, because we were once children. And as I mentioned before, we never are fully grown adults. So all of these principles we absolutely can apply to the child that exists within to make sure that we are nourishing and taking care of our own psychological, emotional, and spiritual parts of ourselves as well. And we have to always remember, we have the skills, we have the talents, we have the abilities, and we have the absolute best partner. Just as it's critical to raising a child to have the best spouse, the best physical partner, we have to recognize that we have the best spiritual partner. God himself is a parent to our child and gives us the physical strength and the spiritual strength to raise proud, committed, healthy Jews that we are going to be able to be proud of and have tremendous nachas from. Thank you so much for joining us for this weekly Torah Studies class. If you have any questions or comments, I'd be very happy to stay on for a few more minutes. All right, satisfied customers who have wonderful children and grandchildren, or will have wonderful children and grandchildren. All right, we have a chat here. Okay, there you go. All right.